thank you very much to having you in this nice interview, and really, this is a great honor for me to have you. And I want to say thanks for all that 10 years that you wrote down this valuable uh, book about. I think it's not about only the film of Kiarostami. But it's about the life of Kiarostami. It's about the Iranian cinema. I appreciate this nice masterpiece. So
Thank you.
let's. This is from my side and the people who like the artistic cinema and Mr. Kiarostami.
Yes.
So I don't want to go to the classic question,
Yeah.
but I want to ask the first meeting with the film of Kiarostami was in a festival of Iranian film. So
Yes.
you come across with the close up,
Yes.
and you're in your top list of the film of Kiarostami is close up, the first one.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I want to ask why close up.
Well, I saw Close Up as part of a Iranian festival, as you mentioned. It was actually the first festival of post-revolutionary Iranian films that had been presented in Iran and in New York. I'm sorry, and I was very struck by many films that I saw. I thought it was a revelation to me because I'd not seen any Iranian films previously. I didn't even know there was anything important going on in the Iranian cinema. So this was just an amazing thing for me to encounter this festival with all of these great films and filmmakers who obviously were really brilliant filmmakers that I'd never heard of before. Mr. Kiarostami's work stood out in certain ways. In Close Up of the films of his that I saw was the one that really struck me the most. And it was striking because of the way that it combined basically fiction and nonfiction elements. It was very hard to detect really how much of this was documentary and how much it was sort of dramatically contrived. But I thought that was really fascinating and really innovative. But it was also really interesting to me because of what it showed about Iranian society and especially the kind of cinephilia that these people had, including Sabzian, the main character, but also the family that he defrauded in a way. And I thought that was really interesting. I had no idea that Iran had such a strong cinephilic element in its society. And I thought it said a lot about different things in Iranian society that were really interesting to me. At that point in history, a decade after the Iranian Revolution, where the film seemed to project a little bit of disappointment about the revolution in the sense that these classes were still divided. The revolution had not delivered a classless society as maybe some people had expected. But anyway, there were a lot of elements to this. Mainly the elements were cinematic, but there were also social and historical and political elements too. And there was also a lot of wit to this film. I thought it was in some ways very funny, and I think that Kiarostami's wit is one of the aspects of his work that is often not appreciated enough, because there was humor in pretty much everything that he did. And in getting to know him as a person, I saw that was really a part of his personality. He was witty and he was funny and he had an ironic view of a lot of things. And it was very much a pleasure to be around him, to experience that part of his personality. And I think the more you knew him, the more you saw that in his films.
In these senses, I find two elements that is important for me. Mixing the documentary and fiction, and as you mentioned in your conversation, as I knew that Kiarostami come across with the neorealism Italian film, especially film of Fellini.
Yes.
That I know that he mentioned other film more than these. About Desica, that in the other meeting, also in a private meeting, he told me about that effect of other neorealistic director. But it doesn't important because the main thing is that with the underground private cinematic of master Godfrey that come back from Paris, that work in the cinematic of Paris, and also this was a suggestion that why Mr. Godfrey can make why not Tehran can have a cinematic, and in the first projections that he brought films from Italy.
Yes.
And Abbas Kiarostami was one of the people that continuously saw these films. This is Mr. Godfrey told me the same things, and I heard about it. So, can we say this cinematic and seeing this film was the main point for going Abbas Kiarostami to this docudrama, or mixing the documentary and fiction, or it start before that, or start from working in a canon?
I think in addition to the neo-realist and the Italian films that he would have seen in that period, in the Cinematheque situation in Tehran, there were also a number of important documentary filmmakers working in Iran and doing very good work. And I think for sure he was aware of those. And, they're especially important models like Baruch Farrokhzad's The House is Black, which is often cited as an influence on Kiarostami, and I think certainly it must have been. And also films like Kamran Sherdel's film The Night It Rained, which is another a short film documentary, but mixing sort of fictional elements in. So there was some of that going on in Iranian cinema before Kiarostami went to work at Kanun in 1970. During the 1960s, I think there was kind of a rich period for documentaries and short documentaries in Iranian cinema that presented some of the elements that could go on and influence him and other people in Iranian cinema post-revolutionary who wanted, and even before the revolution, who wanted to incorporate real elements, as the neo-realists had done. There were examples from Italy, but there are also examples in Iranian cinema in the 60s.
Another point for also I want to mention Sohrab Shahid Saleh. That
Yes. He is another one that I think was an influence on Kiarostami.
If I can put some keywords for Kiarostami, documentaries and mixing documentary in the fiction is one of that keyword that's it's important. Another thing that I find in the end of the I cannot say end, in the last film of Kiarostami, I find out that Kiarostami come back to that fantasy that come from painting, come from the art plastic.
Yes.
So it's so important for me. Another keywords in the last film, like a 24 frame.
Yes.
I came across with that Kiarostami come back to the frame, come back to the freeze image. So I want to see this perspective. After that, we come back to our conversation. How you find out Kiarostami start with the Italian neorealist film and the film that is so realistic and reached the art house film, the film that's go to I cannot say any name that's go to the animation, go to the something between painting and cinema that we saw in dreams of Akira Kurosawa, for example,
Yes.
or some
Yes.
other things. How you find these in this line of the life of Kiarostami? How you find these two elements have a connection or have an evolution?
Well, I do think that in the latter part of his career, he went back to some of the things that he was doing or things that he was interested in his early career. And even before he started making films, he was, as you know, a painter and did various kinds of illustration. So he was always interested in those sort of graphic arts, visual arts, apart from cinema. But he was, I think that when he started making films, there was definitely an influence of that work that he'd done in those other media before. And I think that they stayed with him, but they became more obvious later on when, I have in the book that I've published, Conversations with Kiarostami, that you referred to, talk about looking at his career as dividing into three stages, each roughly about 15 years. The first, starting in 1970, was what I call the Qanun period, where he was working mainly at Qanun and doing films for Qanun. And those were films that he made without having the world's attention at all. I mean, he really had an audience just in Iran and was making films just for Iranians and even small audiences, children or whatever in some cases. And then the period that begins with Where's the Friend's House in the late 80s and goes through The Wind Will Carry Us in 1999, I call the Masterworks period because those are the ones that were films that really put him on the world's map and that got him great attention and acclaim all over the world and audiences all over the world. And then the latter period, starting with the year 2000 approximately, and really the films ABC Africa and 10.
But excuse me, can I mention that before these, we find a film that doesn't refer to any of other films, that it's something's different in the different shape and style. That is a report.
Yes, but that is a part that film is different than other films in that first period. It wasn't done through Qanun. It was more of a film for grown-ups. It was more of a sort of a grown-up art film in that period. So it's a little bit anomalous, but it still is within that period when he doesn't have a world audience. And then in the next period, where starting with Where's the Friend's House and going through the Coker trilogy and Taste of Cherry up through The Wind Will Carry Us, these are big feature films that are reaching world audiences because of great acclaim at festivals and from critics and success at the box office in a lot of places. And then when I talk about the final phase, what I call the experimental phase, when he, which starts with ABC Africa and 10 after the year 2000, these are films in a lot of ways that he's going back to the earlier period, I think, and he's experimenting with different things, and he's coming back to things that he was interested in early in his life, even before Qanun. And I think that's how we get to 24 Frames, is that he is plugging into these things that he was interested in as a young man, illustration and graphics and also photography, and he was a very accomplished photographer and very prolific photographer. And he, I think at that point, was particularly interested in framing, framing for the still image, not just for a moving image. And I think all of that comes into play in 24 Frames, which makes it such a fascinating final film, even though it wasn't intended as a final film, it was. And then you look at it and you see all sorts of things from early in his career, his interests and his skills in making films using these different elements.
I want to ask a question that it's about a question.
Yes. Okay.
So that I know about three version of translation of your book.
Yes.
One is normally in English. That I think start with the English edition in the world, and after that French or Persian.
The Persian edition was
Persian,
second.
so
Yeah.
I'm so happy about it. And I want to mention that Lega Press,
Yes.
my nice friend Said Bagherzadeh
Yeah.
make this book, and I want to appreciate, and also Mr. Saleh Najafi translate this
Yeah. Yes.
nice book in English. In
Sure.
the French edition, it's about a question, un cinéma de question.
Yes. Yes. So yes, that's the French edition.
Great. I want to ask, what's the main question of Kiarostami that repeat in the most film of Kiarostami?
I would say, nobody's ever asked me that before, but I think it's a good question. And my immediate answer would be, who am I? I think all of these films are attempts to understand himself in a way. I do think there's a very strong autobiographical element to all of his work, and I don't think that's really been written about or perceived very widely. I think maybe I have a little bit more insight than some people because I knew him, and I could see, when I would see a film, I could see elements of his personality that I knew in the film, but I could also relate it to things going on in his life. For example, the film that you mentioned, The Report, is about a marriage that's coming apart, basically. And that was happening in Kiarostami's life at that time. His marriage was coming apart. So that's just one little example, but I think that all of these films were reflecting on himself in a way, when I answer your question, what is the main question in Kiarostami? I think the main question is, who am I?
I want to ask another question. Which character of in all film of Kiarostami is so close to Kiarostami? More close?
I think a lot of the characters in his films are reflections of himself, not starting with, but including the very first feature he made, Traveler, where there's a little boy in a provincial town that's just determined to get to Tehran to see a soccer match, and he does all these bad things in order to do that. I think that was very much a reflection of Kiarostami's personality, and he said so. And certainly the character the main character, male character in The Report, I think is a reflection of him. But also, if I had to pinpoint just one, I would say the protagonist in Taste of Cherry, the man who's driving around Tehran looking for someone to help him commit suicide. And I don't say that because I thought Kiarostami was particularly suicidal, although I know that he definitely contemplated that, like a lot of people contemplate that. But that character seems to me just very much like Kiarostami was, but minus his good humor and usually very positive outlook. Just the person himself seemed very much like Kiarostami.
Do you think because of that Kiarostami don't want to continue Taste of Cherry with the main film and passage and change the end and come back to him, that he control the way and go to the Louis Armstrong music and and I think it's an atmosphere of drunken atmosphere, like okay, you need to be so relax with this music, and this main time with the first dialogue when we see the backstage is that director says, let's feel free, have a rest.
Yeah, well, that ending of Taste of Cherry is something that people have debated and critics have debated ever since the film came out, pro and con, and trying to figure out why he put that in there. I must say that when I first saw the film, I thought the film would have been better without that. But as I say, there was a lot of discussion about that, and I also wondered if maybe he put it on there thinking that it would help it get the film past the censors in Iran, since making a film about suicide, which is a taboo under Islam, If you had ended with the guy in the grave where it seems like he's dead, that would have been a harder ending than turning it into this thing where he's reminding you it's a film and you're seeing the filmmakers and other things, and it's spring and there's life and all of that. I think that is a possibility, but I was actually in a conversation with some people recently about this, and Kiarostami's son Ahmad said he did not think that was the case. And so it was a part of Kiarostami's conception of the film from early on, apparently. And I think it's very interesting. I think it's interesting to think about the film without that ending, but it's also interesting to think about that ending and what he intended with it, to show that the life goes on. That was the title of one of his films, or the title that was used in English, and life goes on. No matter what happened with that guy in the grave that he was in there at the penultimate scene, after that, life goes on.
Somebody asked Kiarostami, if you are not in life, which element of life is important for you that you said, I missed this element in life? And he said, with 1 minute hesitate, 4 seasons. Did get this answer some things to you after these many conversations and writing this book? The season.
Well, I never talked to him about the seasons, and he never talked to me about the seasons. I mean, I understand that, but maybe that's a way of talking about life and nature in a more general way, because he was very, very, fascinated by and I think emotionally attached to the natural world. A lot of his photography has to do with trees and landscapes, and even in his films, even in Taste of Cherry, there are beautiful landscapes throughout the film. Even though the theme of the film is very dark, there are these beautiful landscapes that the man is going through. And I think that's, throughout his career, there are scenes of nature and a fascination with nature that I think project what his sort of philosophical as well as just personal outlook on, life and what he was interested in life. And nature was really very much at the center of that.
Which element makes this success for film of Kiarostami have been seen? And do you have, do you think that it's for more Iranian films, this opportunity to be seen?
Well, when I started seeing these Iranian films, initially, the things that struck me, and I think struck other people outside of Iran that had not seen these films before, were, first of all, a similarity to neorealism. That's something that you've seen in other countries as well. Countries that come out of war or such, or have really difficult social circumstances. Neorealism is sort of a great model for those things, both in kind of a thematic way, but also an aesthetic way. People take their cameras out into the streets. They're not making movies in studios, and they're making movies about real people, often using real people to play the main parts. Those were things that people associated with a neorealism that was striking in seeing these come up in Iran that very early on. There was also the films that were about children that projected a real kind of humanism that I think people were struck by. They weren't expecting that from Iran. And I think when I say that, those films, I'm talking about films like Where's the Friend's House by Kiarostami, but also The Runner by Amir Naudari, Bachu, the Little Stranger by Bahram Bezai, and others like that. So you have the neorealist element and you have the kind of humanist element that comes out in the films about children. But those were all there at the time. It had already been getting international attention. But then comes Close Up, and Close Up is the film that I think introduces a new element, which is films about cinema itself and about filmmakers. And that's sort of two different things in terms of Close Up. It's a film about the impact of cinema on people, and a lot of very fascinating things about the role of cinema in Iranian society that is some of it very, very specific and only in Iranian society, but others are, applicable to other countries and other cultures that have cinephile elements. But that's one part, the films reflecting on cinema and cinema's purposes and operations in society. But the other is filmmakers. In Close-Up, you have two filmmakers. You have Makhmalbaf. Actually, you have three. You have Makhmalbaf. You have the fake Makhmalbaf, who poses as a filmmaker and is a sort of can be considered, he considers himself a filmmaker in a certain sense. And so we can identify himself in one. And then you have Kiarostami himself, who is very much, you see him a few times and you hear his voice some, but his presence is sort of felt throughout the film. So, as I say, this was something that introduced a new element to Iranian cinema in terms of its perception in the West. And I think that was what really elevated the interest in Iranian cinema. And I think, I don't have concrete evidence for this, but I do think that even though the Cannes Film Festival did not show Close-Up initially, it was that film that made them interested in Kiarostami so that they showed his very next film, which was And Life Goes On. And then everything thereafter can show. So, like I say, that new element of films about filmmaking and films about filmmakers was the thing that launched Iranian cinema to a new level.
Do you think that the discover of Kiarostami that it takes long time? In a private conversation, he told me it's a 30 years working, and after that, after 30 years, West discover my film. I don't know, these 30 years is false or this is reality.
That's not really true, because it was after he had only been working for about 15 years or so in the late 80s that he first got an international audience or international attention when Where's the Friend's House won a number of prizes at the Locarno Film Festival. And from then on, he had an international audience. So it was a little over 15 years between his beginning and his first international serious recognition.
So I want to ask about the position of women in the film of Kiarostami. So we don't have a basic character that can lead in the film of Kiarostami. So especially in Taste of Cherry, you cannot tell me that this is a character, that is a woman in this film, and so it's just so important, the 50% of the world and the life, and also there is not the main character doesn't have any relationship, doesn't have any elements for having a woman in his life. How do you find this in the film of Kiarostami?
Well, I think that, in the early Kanun films, those are films mainly focused on children. And it was kind of natural to focus on boys. And because those are the ones, and plus he had two young sons, and that was another, factor in his interest in boys, in school situations and just other childhood situations. So that's the case with those short films from the Kanun period. But when you get to the film that you pointed out, The Report, that's about a marriage, and there's a very strong female character there that I think is his first very significant female character, and was possible there in the period of the pre-revolution. It was easier to deal with female characters in a realistic way. And then when we get to after the revolution, he and other filmmakers are frustrated by the rules that say that all women have to have the hijab, have to have the scarf on at all times, including in home situations where they would not have had them in real life. And so Kiarostami and Amir Nadari have both said to me that was why they started making films like The Runner and Where's the Friend's House that dealt just with children. That left off the problems of having to deal with women characters in situations that wouldn't be realistic. I mean, they were both very oriented toward realism in their films. That was a key element of their aesthetic. And so they didn't want to have to make films that misrepresented the reality that they knew in Iran. So, but at the same time, in Where is the Friend's House, the mother is a very strong character and a very important character, and I think one that's very well realized. And the other films in the Coker trilogy, and Life Goes On, there are a number of women there. I mean, even though the two main characters are the filmmaker and his son, but there are women in and out of the frame and in and out of the story there, and some very interesting ones too. And then you get to Through the Olive Trees, and that really is about a boy and a girl, and the girl doesn't speak, and I think there's a lot of things you can say about that, but she is a very important character. And the director's assistant, who you see very early in the film and is throughout the film, is also an important character. So it's not like women are totally absent from these films at this time, but you're right, in Taste of Cherry there is no female presence. I think that is in some ways reflective of the very, there's a despairing mood of that film. There are not women there because there's not much happiness or the things that you might associate with women. But then after that, there is a great scene with a woman who runs a restaurant and the Wind Will Carry Us. Not the major character, but also a very vivid character of a woman. And then it's after that, after he goes into what I call the experimental period, that women become very much more important, because I think for various reasons he felt he had the freedom to deal with women, and so he made 10, which is all about women, and he felt like he could do that because he wasn't having to show the inside of anyone's home. All of that film is in a car, and the car, the women would have in Iran had their headscarves on, so he was able to deal with women in that situation. And then after that, he went on having women characters, and I think especially the two films that he elected to make outside of Iran, A Certified Copy and Like Someone in Love, of course, those have very, very important central women characters in them, and I think that's because he was out of Iran and he could do anything he wanted to in those films, and that really showed in a way why there hadn't been so many women in prominent roles in the previous films, because he didn't feel like he had the freedom that he had outside of Iran.
How we can compare the film of Abbas Kiarostami out of Iran and that film made in Iran? How you can find some elements that it's so different in the style, in the filmmaking?
I think that those films are really, really interesting, because I call this period the experimental period, because it seemed like in every film he was experimenting with something he hadn't done before. And, making a film outside of Iran, that was a big experiment for him to take, a big step for him to take. He and a lot of other Iranian directors from the post-revolutionary period, said to me and indicated in lots of different interviews that they felt like their art was rooted in Iranian culture, and that if they went abroad, they wouldn't have the artistic success, or the commercial success or anything. So there was a real wariness, I think, among Kiarostami and other filmmakers of this period, wariness of going outside of Iran to make a film. So this was a leap for him, and in his first feature outside of Iran. And I thought he acquitted himself very well. But I will say that what distinguishes this film on a thematic level, to me, is that he is dealing with conflicts between men and women, attraction and conflicts, and marriage, the issue of marriage, in a way that is very imaginative, but also reflects his thinking about marriage ever since he made the report. The report, in some ways, is about marriage and is a companion piece to this film. But this film, Certified Copy, is reflecting a lot of things that he's thought and felt since he made the report. And then when we get to Like Someone in Love, I think here again it's about men and women, male and female in a lot of ways. But here the element that it hasn't been there before is the question of age. You have a younger woman and a much older man, and there's also another man in the picture who's younger. But the key relationship is between the young woman and the older man. And even though that actor who played the older man at that time was something like, I think, a decade older than Kiarostami was when he made the film, I think it was, in a way, Kiarostami reflecting on age as a part of desire and relations between men and women. I think he, in some ways, identified with that older character and was reflecting on, how he could relate to women or what he felt about women or thought about women as he was going into old age.
Can you find a relationship between men and women and copy and real in, for example, a copy confirm? What's the relationship? These two major things. There is some mystery that is hidden in this film.
As I say, I think that this was him wanting to reflect on marriage and relations with women, between men and women, for the first time, really in a full-blooded, grown-up way that he had done since the report. And I think it was a very imaginative thing for him to come up with this conception of a film that basically divides into two parts. And in the first part, the man and the woman characters are people who are strangers to each other and just meet and then go off on this journey. And then the second part is, during that journey, there's a change all of a sudden, and that we suddenly understand that these people are not strangers, that they have been married and they've had a long relationship. And so from there till the rest of the end of the film, it's a married couple, not a couple of strangers. But I think this was so clever in a way, because rather than just talking about these people as a long married couple, he shows them as strangers first of all. And in some ways, people are always strangers to each other, even no matter how close they get. There's an element of strangeness and mystery that has to be dealt with, that is a part of the relationship. And then when we get to the second half, we see the tensions in the relationship as a long married couple, but between the attraction that they have and the kind of tension and problems that they've had. You get all of that. You get all of that, those facets of a marriage in that second half of the film. But it's almost like a mirrors reflecting each other. Each is reflecting an idea of these people that sort of complement each other, but are also kind of the opposite of each other. That's one of my, I think, in some ways, that film did very well commercially, but it wasn't as successful with audiences, I think, as other films. And part of that may be because people always wanted to see Kiarostami as an Iranian filmmaker in Iran, but it was also because of this conception that he had of this film, whereas half of the film, you're relating to these two characters in a certain way. They're strangers. And then in the second half, rather surprisingly, you're relating to them as a married couple. And I think that didn't allow viewers the kind of a close, consistent identification with the characters that most films give us. It was more of an intellectual conception that presupposed a kind of distance between the viewer and the characters. You're looking at kind of an intellectual construct that you need to think about rather than just emotionally, identify with.
So there's a speech of especially government of Iran that they said to people that if the artists go out of Iran and make film, there's not any success for also the masters.
Yes.
So this continue many years, and effect on the many filmmakers.
Yes.
So any filmmaker go out of Iran and want to continue the life or continue to making the film, there's not any success. Only the artist should be in Iran and live in Iran and make films.
Right. Well, the government said that, but I think a lot of filmmakers felt the same way, irrespective of the government. And it was only Kiarostami doing this and making this film, that certified copy, that was very successful, proving that you could do that. You could go outside of the country and make films. And he did it again with Like Someone in Love. Both of those films were counted artistically successful and were commercially successful. So he did prove that, but it didn't, we had to wait until the arrival of Asghar Farhadi for someone who would be very successful internationally with an Iranian film. So there are not that many examples. There's certainly other directors that have tried that, but hardly any that have had the success that Kiarostami and Farhadi did when they did it. And I think that that's in part because they were already so well established internationally that they could have made a film anywhere and there would have been an audience wanting to see what they did.
This question, I want to be... so my question is that why Oscar opened the door for another style, another genre for the film of Asghar Farhadi, that Kiarostami go through the method that we can say it's a art house like European film, and maybe Asghar Farhadi continue the style and genre that it's more suitable for Oscar, and the way the American sources, I don't know, that people in America that want to have another filmmaker in Iran to continue, not only for filmmaking, for putting the line and says, okay, this is that you can go. So it's a style of filmmaking in Hollywood, and with that you have the taste of people, you have audience. With this audience, it's not only about the film, it's about changing the culture, changing the taste, like that.
Yes. Yes.
How you find these two choosing? So Kiarostami was under focus of the Cannes Film Festival, and Asghar Farhadi under focus of the 2 times winning in the Oscar, and so different genre, different style.
Right. Well, they Kiarostami and Farhadi have very different sensibilities as artists and different styles and different approaches. And Kiarostami's, as you said, was much more akin to kind of European art film sensibility, and he did, sort of climb the mountain. He reached the mountaintop when he won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, and then the very next film he won top prize at Venice. So he had sort of done that world as much as he could. He'd done it as well as he could. He reached the maximum recognition and acclaim. And I think it's very significant that after that, he turned into what I call more experimental filmmaking, more of an experimental attitude, because those were films that he made that were not going to have a big Hollywood presence or anything like that. He consciously made that choice. I think at the time, after The Wind Will Carry Us, he could have gone for a more American style, a more Hollywood style or whatever, but that was just not in his nature as an artist. And so I think he really made a very interesting and wise choice in going back and just focusing on things that interested him, irrespective of commercial considerations or whatever. Whereas Farhadi came up, and it's interesting that the one thing that Farhadi did, it reflected in a separation that sets him apart from Kiarostami and some of the other filmmakers in Iran, was he did have films about a marriage in people's homes, in a couple's homes, where the women are wearing the headscarves indoors. And people say that's unrealistic. He just made the film anyway. And I think that was a very interesting decision for him to make. And I think it was a very smart one, too, because he wanted to have the key things be the emotions between the characters, not what anybody had on their head or whatever. And I think that portrayal of that marriage and the problems within that, actually 2 families that you encounter in that film, have a lot to do with the emotion, putting the emotions front and center, and not worrying about other more superficial aspects. So what he did, I don't know that he was aiming for Hollywood, but I think he has a very commercial sensibility in a way, but the way that that film happened, a separation, the first one that really broke out and made it all the way to the Oscars, was interesting because he made it in Iran. It goes to Berlin, wins the top prize at Berlin, and then it continues to have success all over the world, even before it reaches the United States. And by that time, it had had so much acclaim that it was more of a commercial film, even in the foreign film realm or the art film realm. It had a lot of commercial power, and that got Hollywood's attention. But I think the film is a very accessible film that, you know, a lot of just grown-up adult moviegoers are interested in the relationships they see in there. I think that in the filmmaking itself is very, very brilliant and finely honed, and I think that's an attraction. I think people are also interested in what the film is saying about Iran or showing about Iran, but it's mainly a story about people that focuses closely on their emotions and their dilemmas and their problems in ways that are very relatable. And those are the things that put it over commercially and led him to the Oscars. And I think the same thing is true of the film that followed that, The Salesman, which reached the Oscars for pretty much the same reasons.
So going to that way, in the long feature film of Kiarostami that made in Italy, in Japan,
Yes.
and
Yes.
in China. So going to that way, having Juliette Binoche and having more audience, and you said go to more commercial. How can access to more audience and continue the life? It's about Kiarostami, and it's about more other filmmaker like Jim Jarmusch, like Terrence Malick, like many names that you know. I have this question: how they can continue the life of being in the cinema and having the audience and continue the life, not only in the museum, in the art house.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, it depends on the individual filmmakers, and the individual filmmakers have choices that they can make that make them more commercial or more artistic, if you will. And I think that some of the directors that you've just mentioned, they consciously are wanting to be true to their own artistic vision first and foremost. And in some cases, those choices they make in that regard will lead them to a greater audience. But I don't think that those filmmakers are the type that go looking for an audience, first of all, and compromising their vision to find that audience. I think they stick by their own vision and their own values, and if it takes them to a bigger audience, great. If it doesn't, that's okay. They really, you know, people like Kiarostami or Terrence Malick or Jim Jarmusch, by a certain phase in their career, they have enough of an artistic reputation and a proven success at the box office in the art house world that they could go on making the kinds of films that they want to make. There's no real pressure on them to make a film that's going to make $50 or $100 million. You know, they can do, and I think most of these directors do continue to make their films, and the films that they want to make. And I say that in regard to Farhadi as well. I think his sensibility has more sort of Hollywood elements to it, but I don't think he's trying to pander to an international audience. I think he's making the films that he wants to make and that he wants to see, and I quite like his films as well. I do think his vision is valid, and I think it was good that he came along when he did to show that Iranian cinema didn't have to be just like Kiarostami, that it could go off in other directions. I mean, I've talked to younger Iranian filmmakers who said that in some ways, after the 90s, the examples of Kiarostami and Makhmalbaf became kind of oppressive for younger filmmakers because people thought, oh, if you're going to make films that get seen outside of Iran, you got to be like one of those. And Farhadi came along and proved that you could do something completely different. And I think he opened the door for a lot of other filmmakers that followed him to be more wide-ranging in the kinds of films that they made and not have to think too much about the models that came before.
If we can say some names, Kiarostami is close to which director before him?
You mean Iranian directors that came before?
No,
Non-Iranian directors.
no, international.
I don't know that when I think about his work, and I've been doing this for a long time, I'm not struck by any strong comparisons. I mean, there's some things in there like Kurosawa, I think, is a comparison. I think
Yasujiro Ozu.
Yeah, I think Kurosawa maybe more than Ozu actually, but also Fellini, as we mentioned before, Rossellini. I think those Italian films of the 50s and 60s were by directors that have a sort of a similar sensibility. De Sica. I guess those are the main ones. I don't think of I don't think of American filmmakers that I think, other than Buster Keaton, of course. He always said that he was a big fan of Buster Keaton. Other than Buster Keaton, I don't think of other American directors that really seem similar in any significant way to Kiarostami.
Have you any conversation about the new film of Kiarostami in China?
No, I've read some about that. I know that he was planning to do this film, and I think he had already planned it in some detail. I think he had maybe already done like what do you call drawing out the frames and such, and but he hadn't started really making the film.
But I have a good news.
Okay.
But I don't know if I say or no. I know about some things that it's this film. The maquette of film is complete, and anybody doesn't know about this. And Kiarostami, before making the film, make the maquette.
Right, exactly.
And I hope to have this maquette as a film, and why not someday. I want to make it open this secret to be done.
I think maybe it's not such a good idea to make a film out of it because it's not him making the film. But I think
only using this maquette as a.
Okay. Yeah, that could work. That could work, or they could just publish that as a book.
Yeah.
So people could look at it like that, follow it like a comic book almost.
Why you find Kiarostami so close to yourself?
To what?
Why you find Kiarostami and the film of Kiarostami so close to Godfrey Cheshire?
Oh, I don't know. When I first encountered his work and started to try to understand the films, I really I felt like they satisfied a lot of the things that I was looking for in cinema. There was a real intelligence, there was a real wit, there was a real kind of sensuality, and there was a real cultural specificity. It reflected a lot of things about Iran, and through him and some of these other films, I became really fascinated with Iranian culture, Persian culture, the whole history of that, the artistic culture, poetry. And I started going to Iran, and that only increased my fascination and appreciation of Persian culture. I've now been to Iran 7 times and stayed a fair amount of time. So, yeah, those things, those initial things that attracted me are things that led me to a lot of other things in cinema and in Iranian culture.
If you apologize me, I want to ask.
Okay.
You find you are close to which character of the film of Kiarostami?
Nobody's ever asked me that before. I think it has to be one of the kids. I think maybe the kid in Where's the Friend's House, the main character in that film. I like that character quite a bit, and I feel like the dilemmas that he is dealing with and his persistence in trying to solve them is something that I think is an admirable characteristic, and is something that I identify with myself because I try to pursue things in that same way.
So we can find why Godfrey Cheshire is so nice, and it's the main keyword of the film of Kiarostami is promise, and he has a poem that promise is more important than contract.
Yes, exactly.
Excuse me about this translation. It should be more better than it. Only I want to transfer the meaning
Yes.
of you, this character, and the main message of this film, that is a keyword, is promise, and the other reference to a poem of Kiarostami, Promise. So I'm so happy to have you in this conversation. I want to give this part of the conversation to you. Let's add something that you want, or I have. Otherwise, I have another question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I have a, I don't know, crazy way in my conversation that in the end I ask to the person who I ask a lot to ask me, refer to this subject, refer to this conversation. If you
Yes.
ask me a question, it's a game. I change the position, if you like.
Right. Well, sure. I can ask you the same question that you just asked me: is which character in a Kiarostami film do you identify with?
The character of Musafir.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I
I
can understand that.
I think he's so close to me. I'm so close to this. The last sequence of the film is something that I cannot resist to say. This is a masterpiece.
Yes, it is. It definitely is.
When he sleep in the golden time that he tried. This is the life of all of us, many people in the world who
Yes.
try to access, and for example, in 16 years, in 17 years, go to prepare the house, and something's happened in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great character and a great film.
Thank you very much.
Certainly.
And again, I want to say thank you for this nice book, and I hope to have more masterpiece, more critiques about precious films like a film of Abbas Kiarostami and other good filmmaker from you. Thank
Right.
you very much.
You're
Please.
welcome. I'll tell you that I do have another book in the works. It's already written. I'm just waiting to publish it. It's called In the Time of Kiarostami, Writings on Iranian Cinema. So it assembles a lot of the things that I've already written about Kiarostami and other directors in one volume. And I'm really looking forward to having that published because people are interested in what I've written about Kiarostami, and this is the first time a lot of
you finished this book or
finished. Yes.
Oh, great!
Yeah.
Congratulations.
That's right.
So
we're just looking for a publisher now. So, but I hope it'll be out either this year or next year.
Okay. So
yeah.
We will be honored to have a conversation about that book together. If you
yes,
like.
I'll be very glad to do that. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate this.
Thank you very much, and have a nice time with this storm in the peaceful and calmness and the best mood in this storm around the people, also in New York that you told me. Thank you very much, Master.
Okay. Thank you, Sharon.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
time. Bye.
You too.